beauty about this one is I don't have to switch because I'm going to sit here and do it. So I don't have to run over there. So I've done this at every single rug is to present about change management functionality. And basically in change management, customers don't start off with change in some cases. My current customer doesn't use change. We do a lot of changes, but they don't put it in a system of remedy. They have it outside, and it's a spreadsheet. And they want to get into change management. They have a group that's supposed to handle it. They don't have a cab, but they do have a group that actually gets involved in it and so forth. So these are some best practices. When people ask me to come in and help them set it up, I started off at Red Cross and doing the change, and it worked perfect. But you also have to have, and this is a key factor, you have to have a project manager on the customer side to support what you're telling them to do. So he backed up everything I did because I had one person that refused to put in normal tickets, normal changes. He was very adamant about doing everything on Wednesday and having it done on Thursday. And I'm like, that's an expedite. And on our expedited process, he had to go out and make sure all the cab approved it. And he would say, no, you have to go out and make sure everybody. I said, no. You're the one that's doing expedited. It's in your hands. All you have to do is get everybody to do it. So the project manager came back and told him, Lenny's right. You want it expedited. Yours is really not a expedited ticket. It's just because you want to get it done and you don't have your standardized functionalities. You have to track them down. Guess what he did? He converted them all to standard. So he still didn't have to get the approval in that aspect. So these are just some of the things as far as to go over the change management. I want to introduce the biggest thing that I always see is nobody has defined their business processes thoroughly. So business process is a key factor. Just like in release management, I helped a company out in Norway to set up their release management. I kept on asking, do you have your changes done? Do you have your change process? Because change is tightly integrated with release. And basically it came back after we set up everything, says, well, we can't go live with release because we don't have our change processes done. So then they had to go back to do their change. And that's when I was working with Unisys at the time. And then I'll get into some of the bullet statements for best practice. So change management is really, if you deal with ITIL, it works in conjunction with configuration management. So you're changing the environment. Anytime that you're making a change to the environment, adding something, removing something, upgrading, updating, whatever, it generally should be a change request. Wait a minute, Lenny. What? We do work orders. We move things out of the environment. We move things around, but that's okay. I mean, it's a predefined functionality that it goes to that organization to make these moves. But the problem is, it is still changing the environment. If you move my computer from point A to point B, don't I have different connections? Don't I have new cable connections? Doesn't somebody else have to respond to it if it's a different location instead of a different or different site, I should say? So it should come through a change process, but not everybody follows it. So the goal of this is to make sure that you have a true change control system. You should know what's being changed and not being changed. I've talked to application managers and they're not in the know of database changes. And all of a sudden they're starting getting issues with their application. So I helped them implement the cab. They didn't have a cab. So I said the application manager needs to be involved in this cab and be made aware of it. And then I also implemented one of my biggest best practices is send out an email notification for approval at the implementation level to all cab authorities. That way they're aware of what's happening. And so when they come to the meeting, they already know everything you're going to ask them, hopefully. Or as a change manager that's in charge of the change advisory board, I could ask them, what's wrong with this? Why didn't you approve it? What's wrong with it? Why did you reject it? I can ask them. So those are the kind of things that you're looking at in the change management piece. Now, change does have tasks. So it is now incident. If you go to 20.08, incident has tasks that you can automatically attach to an incident ticket. I'm still befuddled as to why you'd want to do that, because usually an incident is a break fix. But people refuse to go to change management, so now they wanted the task, so we had to do it. So BMC does it. Now, when I say we, I mean in that case BMC. Change management always has the task in it. It also has task phase management, which gives you task at the draft level. They call it the review level. They have task at the implementation, which is the standard, and they have task at the close down, which is handy in certain scenarios. Like at the Census Bureau, it would have been handy if we had that capability, if they would let us implement, because there is always documentation. I had one woman come to me, it's like, why are all these changes closing when I didn't approve it? Well, number one, we didn't have a stopgap, and number two, your alternate has been approving them for you. So while she's there, so I said, you have a problem on your alternate, and number two, if you want me to stop it, I'll stopgap it before everything goes into final stage where you have a say so. Okay, so those are what you got to look at, is how you can handle those business processes in that capacity. So in change management, the implementation of best practices, you have to understand the different processes that are out there. You have to understand the different roles that an individual can get involved with. You have to understand the benefits that your control process is going to do. And you can't get the benefits if you don't have a true change control functionality. So basically, changing how you conduct business or changing a user. Everybody remember that person? Can you recognize it? Can you see it? When he left BMC, he had to get a new account and get a new job. He's a caterer. Just kidding. He's not here to hassle. Doug Mueller, everybody knows, he was the godfather of BMC or of revenue. And he hassled me at one conference where he came up, had sent somebody that was in my class before, sent him up and said, basically, I was told that you're supposed to teach us the right thing, not the Lenny way. And I said, that was Doug, wasn't he? He goes, yeah. And then Doug came up to me on my first conference, and I was like nervous already doing in front of like 100 and some odd people. And he came up in the middle of the break and he goes, everything you just said is a lie, and walked away. And I'm like, what the heck? And I talked to him. He goes, yeah, everything you said is changing, but it's good now, but it's changing. And so it's like, but he threw me off for a loop. So I get him back now with this. Okay. Now, again, I want to be brief on this one. You have incident, work order, problem, and change. Incident is a quick fix. That's what it's all about. It's not really set up and shouldn't be used as a service request. You have a front-end service request like Kinetic or Request Console or DWP or whatever. That handles the service part of it. So an incident is, hey, I got a problem or I have a question. That's what it's all about. It's not about moving something or fixing or installing, which is what I do today in my environment because they don't use anything else. Work orders, does work order have an approval process? Does it? You have to configure and you have to do some customizations. And Richard from ADT here is trying to get it done. He's got one stag and he can't find anybody to help him fix it. He's trying to implement work approvals and work orders. It does have the field attributes and settings and things like that that you can connect to it, but there is a process you have to complete to do it. Well, work orders was really designed for non-IT related functionality. People use it for IT to move computers and stuff because it's easier to put out as a work order because people know what a work order is to go move a computer or change this cable with another cable or whatever it needs to be done. And that's what the National Nuclear Laboratory Company did. They used work orders to give it to their asset people, and that was it. Nobody else got into work orders. Okay. Well, what if it was a move and somebody put in, hey, I got a broken laptop? Well, what I had to do was incident is a break fix, and they had to change something on the incident ticket to trigger the workflow to automatically create the work order. Because out of the box, incident and work order, you do not have the ability to click on create a work order and pass the data from the incident to the work order. So I created the workflow based on if they said something to pass it into the work order, and it worked perfect. Okay. But of course, then they wanted a custom form to give it as the work order form to spit out. So I had to add some more workflow functionality. But again, that's hither and there. Problem management is about fixing issues. Whether it's a change, an incident, or work order that fails, it can bleed into a problem. Okay. So a change can result in a problem too. Can a change result in an incident ticket? Yeah, it could. But again, what you have to understand and change though is if it is something that fails to install, it's really a problem ticket. It's not an incident. Okay. You have this whole plan mapped out and then something failed in your implementation. It's not an incident, it's a problem. And you need to try to find the root cause of it. You don't do that in incident. Incident is a quick fix. And I'm trying to do this implementation of a plan. You've got to go and find out what the problem is. You have to do an investigation. So think about that. So problem is kind of like the bottom layer for incident, work order, and change. When you do this, then you create a problem if something is an issue. Okay, that draws up in that capacity. Yes.
Do most people split out incident, problem, work order? Because we don't. Everything just goes into an incident ticket regardless of what we do. It's like, well, maybe we should start splitting things out, but we've never used in 20 years. We've never. Well, recently we just had the,
Well, the question is, do you split out the incident, work orders, and change, or does everybody do that? And the answer is no, not everybody does it. My current customer only does incident. But he puts change stuff in there. He puts work order stuff in there. Everything dumps into the incident side. The implementation that I helped do at the end of last year, we implemented everything. Change, incident, work order, problem. We split it up. House of Representatives uses everything and they split it up. And it's the organizations of what they're doing. So when you're dealing with applications, servers, databases, they go into change management because they're doing a lot of patch installs and new build outs and things like that. Should they go to release? Yes, but they're not ready yet. There's hardly anybody mature enough to go to release, which is why BMC is not going to touch the release side as far as expanding it in Smart IT to have that custom field capability, the current configuration field settings. They're not going to expand or waste more time on it because there's not a lot of people using release. Okay, because it's a little more complex and for a longer process, but they do incorporate change. Okay, now what I like about change is it does have a field that you can do release in it because it's called project versus a change type. But BMC hid that field. So one of the things I always do is expose that field. So in case you wanted to have a release-like environment, you can have a change that's listed as a project and have multiple changes tied to it to identify it as a part of that project. Like I need to do dev, I need to do QA, I need to do prod, and then the approvals can be done to whoever needs to handle those. I don't want my CEO approving a QA and dev, but I want the CEO to do the production type thing. So yes, they should separate them, but do they? Not everyone. Okay, and then the biggest thing is too many forms. They don't want their users to go to do too many different forms. Well, you got a ticket console. Ticket console is going to tell you what ticket it's in.
Or reporting.
That is correct. But then again, you could do that in smart reporting. You can pull them in, but then again, what's tied to it, you'd have to tie it to the person itself or the group that you're looking for. But you can do that because the group field is always given to that aspect. And BMC does give you that view to pull all that data together. Or you can build your own custom join form, however you want to do it. So some of the best practices, I've already hit this, business process, get your business processes in line. The key for having the business process is having a definitive change control process. You can't have that without a business process. You have to define what you want them to do from point A to point B. So this is just going into what you need to do. You need to identify the goals. You need to identify the starting points, the actions that take place between the beginning and the end. And then you look at it as a whole, the abnormal directions. Well, what if I didn't import the software in my database server? Oh, create a problem ticket, investigate why it failed. That's the abnormal, because we're hoping we tested everything and everything's there. So then you look at that as a whole. And so I'm just getting into the business process flow of it. So here's one of old school, the process flow chart for change management. It doesn't always define the right process. So this one says you start off with the change. Here's my question to you. You don't use change, right, Kim?
we just bought licenses for it. to
Okay.
Start using it. We're now in discussions with our DevOps group and our networks, operations group for starting to try to plan and lay out how we're going to implement changes.
Well, the biggest thing I would recommend you to do when you're going to create a change request is limit it to the change coordinators to create. Don't give it to an outside source to create a change request. Keep it to the ones that need to deal with changing the server, the database, the application. Let them create the change because number one, you have a change request requirement. I have to give you the scheduled start and end dates. I have to give you the plans, the implementation, the backout plans. I have to get the people together. I have to do all these tasks that set up and who's going to do what? Well, who's going to do that? That's the coordinator. You don't request that as a non-coordinator. Okay, you shouldn't go through Kinetic or DWP or whatever to create a change request, number one. Number two, should I create a change from an incident? The answer is yes, but not you. Should be the change coordinator. Assign the incident to the change coordinators group, have them look at it to determine, is this an incident? What this process says is when you look at the change request that's coming in, do you create a release? Well, we don't have release management. We skip that whole process altogether. We eliminate it. But the key is who's going to create the change, who's responsible for the change overall is your change coordinator. But who's responsible for the organization's process is your change manager. The change manager doesn't care about the ticket. They care about, did you follow the process? Did you fill in the scheduled time? Did you prep it for the cab to see it? I'm taking your change request to the cab and it better be done so I can answer the questions that the cab has, or your butt's going to be in that cab meeting with me and answer their questions. When I worked at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, the banking, I wanted a simple filter put in, a simple filter to stop people from creating and modifying tickets in the environment so we can upgrade. And I had to do a 25-page document for the change, for the CAD, the change approval board, a 25-page document of what's going to happen. Why? Because when they did it before, they took everybody's permissions away, found out that somebody screwed up and they had to go back and give permissions back to everybody. It took 8 hours to do that. I said, why did you do that? Why don't you just put the simple filter in and say, you're not allowed to submit, modify, or delete. You can search, but you can't do any of those others. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Simple. Well, I went into the cab, gave them the report, and they did not understand remedy, and they still did not approve. I had to wait another week. And I had to prove to them, look, I had to get in there, demo it, and say, here you go. And I demoed it, and they said, oh, okay, I see. You can go ahead and do it. But it took me 3 weeks, one, to write the 25-page document, one, to go and find out that they still wanted more information. So I had to set up the demo and then go back again to the cab. And the cab was meeting at once a week. And I couldn't do that. So our whole thing got delayed. So I said, well, what if I just send them an approval and let it go? Then they can let me do it that way. So again, the process flow was pretty bad. Here's another example of a process flow for a hiring company. In your process flow on the left-hand side, you identify who's doing what at what point. And then you just build the flow process and sit down and map it out. So like for the case of the COVID tracking that you are doing, okay, do you have a process for COVID tracking? Do you have it drawn out, or you just say, this is how we're going to do it? See?
Well, we tried to get them to own it and draw it out.
Right.
Because we just built the application, and now because it's being used so much more, and as we're having all these meetings, I literally waste so much time in meetings every week on anything COVID related or
Right.
projects that we're doing. But we walk them through, and as we're walking them through what they're doing and talking it out in meetings, they're starting to get, oh yeah, now I know why you wanted this document, because you guys keep changing your story or which is going where. And
Right.
there's, now literally, what was it? 13 pages of tables of if then else. If somebody was in this room with this, literally it's a spider web of
Right.
whether you have to stay home or not.
So you started off with showing them what the tool can do based on what little information they gave you. And then they started adding on more and more. And that's what happened to me. And that's what you're going to get on the next session if you're here for the approvals. Because the customer came in and started off with, I would need custom fields. Well, what are the fields? Random. And then near the end of it, he goes, well, can you put different data in there? It's like, yeah, what do you want? Well, I'll take care of it. Just get rid of it. So I got rid of it, but he never touched the data. So it always changed. And then he goes, oh yeah, by the way, instead of 2 processes, we need 4 processes. Okay, well, why didn't you draw it out? They didn't have that information to give me. They gave me a spreadsheet saying this is what we need, but they didn't tell me what happens at different points. And then it's just in discussion. So it wasn't defined. So it took me 2 months to build what they wanted because the requirements kept changing because the business processes wasn't defined.
Well, and some of the, I mean, the person that's responsible for our contact tracing, she's a retired administrator.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, technology and processes are not her forte. Dealing with people is her strong suit, not, you know, walking through a process and making it better or refining it, which is where we had to step in.
And again, that's where I'm with my customer. I ask them all the time where his business processes are, and it's in his head. It's like everything he wants done in Remedy is all in his head. And then I have to ask detailed questions so I can figure out what I need to change in the tool to meet his process. Because I guarantee you, he's not changing his process because he doesn't really have a process. It's not clearly defined. So that's why I get into the process. And I always push that. So here are some things that I want you to think about. Number one is understand the tool that change management gives you. Because now you need to fit the process to the tool or fit the tool to the process. So you have to look at that in that aspect. So in other words, I always say the change coordinator should know what you want me to put in to the change request. The change manager needs to have what they need to look for in the change request. Okay. For example, you have an implementation document. Okay. Can I change that implementation document after the CAB has approved it? Yes or no? So on the checklist, what I suggest happens is either you build workflow or you have the manager go in and lock down the activity logs that are public and lock them down once it's been implemented. Well, I can guarantee you the change manager is not going to do that. So guess what? I have to do? Modify the tool because you can have them download the implementation document, but if they try to upload it, it ain't going to happen if it's locked. Which I don't care if they download it. I just don't want them to give me a new document because you've already got it approved. Here's another question. You go through change management and it gets through the review process. It gets through the business approval. We get to the implementation and the CAB says, you're missing this. Redo it. Do you take it all the way back to the beginning or do you reject it, have them fix it and come back to the implementation phase? Do you even bother going back to review and business approval? Or you just go right back to the implementer that said what else you had to do. I recommend best practice, we take it to the beginning because now the reviewer looked at something, the business approver looked at something, they are agreeing to it, then you change the whole thing. And now I have no clue what the heck's going on. So when I do my configuration process, instead of rejecting it, I send it back to draft. And then in the change management configuration setting, I set the notification to draft to go to the change coordinator because I want them to get notified because they don't get an email if it's set to draft. There is no notification for draft unless you set that configuration. So does everybody see that in the process? I looked at the tool. I don't like the way BMC set the tool. It gave me the tools to do it, but I modified the configuration setting to kick it back to draft. The CAB can tell them to cancel it, but they shouldn't be the ones to cancel it. It should be the coordinator that cancels it because they need to know what happened to it. So I wouldn't, as a CAB, cancel their change. I would say reject it, cancel it. We're not going to do it. And so then I send it back to draft, and then that's when they can cancel it. Because when you cancel a change, what happens to the task? They get all closed. What if you send it back to draft? All the changes or tasks are still open. And then they can cancel it or whatever in that aspect. So make sure that you're aware of that. And the last one I want to stress, well, actually, I'm going to stress hard on the change typing class and the opcats because they have a significance to the form itself. So can you see my form here? A little bit. That's what it looks in Smart IT. It's got all the attributes, but I want you to look at the left-hand side, the icons on the left. So the initial slide that you're looking at is really the attributes. This is where you have your opcats, prodcats, and who's doing it, change coordinator, change manager. But on the left-hand side, you're looking at the risk questions, You're looking at the CIs that you want associated. You're looking at the additional resources that you're doing as well. So you can click on the icons as you go along, and it's going to tell you in the bottom right-hand corner how many more required fields you have to fill out. Okay. So you have those icons to steer you through that whole process. So see how complicated it is already? And you want to create this through a service request. Guess what happens when it goes to service request? For example, I'm going to tell you if it came from SRM. If it came from SRM, you do a change request, which you can. It will create the change request as request for authorization, not draft. So you have nothing, you have no details to support the approval by the manager of that group. Where is your plan? Why do you want this? Who's going to do it? What are the tasks? So immediately they're going to reject it. It's like reject it.
So you wouldn't have any kind of change start from digital base.
I wouldn't, unless you're going to fill in all those requirements, as in, this is what I want you to do. So if you did an innovation studio, or if you did a DWP with the right questions that matches a change, then that's up to you. But I wouldn't, technically. Okay. And the only reason I wouldn't is because who is responsible for gathering up all that information? Who's going to start it up? If I want you to do a change, number one, I'd call you up because I know you're going to be responsible for it. And you're going to submit it for me. I could be the change requester, but you're the one that's going to fill it out for me because you know the details. If I did create one, I would put it in incident to request it. Then get it assigned to the coordinator group who looks at it and says, no, this is an issue. We're not going to do it. Instead of going into change. If it's going to be a change, then they can relate it to the change by creating it. And then close I wouldn't say close the incident, end the incident until the change is done. Does everybody say that? Again, it's just dealing with it and having to create the change request. It's very complicated. And so when I say it's complicated, your change coordinators are limited. Keep them to a small number. So if you have a support group of 15 people dealing with servers, all 15 people should not be a change coordinator. All 15 people are not going to manage how the functionality is going to get done in that server. Give them tasks. So have 3 or 4 people manage the overall picture, but give everybody else task rights. Okay. In ITSM, if I'm in your group, if you're a change coordinator and I have rights to change management, can I modify or add some detail to the change request? The answer is I can. I can add activity. I can add information and activity. I can modify a task that you give to me. I don't have to modify the fields and change. That's your responsibility as a coordinator. So think of it that way. Limit your change coordinators to a small number of people and have them manage the request overall and assign the task to individuals that are them or somebody else within their group that need to do it. Let them deal with the task. Okay, any questions on that? Kind of eliminates them to have to worry about a change. They just worry about the task and it shows up on the screen. Okay.
There's a comment from Christopher Lenny. He said they use a TRB. This back more about approvals, but they use a TRB before going.
Okay. Before going to CAD?
Yeah.
So the TRB is the technical review board?
Yeah. And I've seen that a few times too.
Yeah.
So it's technically been evaluated to proceed to even go to the next step.
And again, that TRB is usually the change manager to make sure everything is there, but the change manager knows all processes, not what specifics has to be done.
Yeah.
So they can look at it as, did they add an implementation plan, a verification plan, and a backup plan?
See, I've seen it as TRBs are the server teams and your DBAs. They're doing a technical review.
Right.
Make sure they don't have any concerns before it even goes to real planning.
Right. And this is where you can do ad hocs. You can create an ad hoc approval. But here's the problem about ad hoc approvals. When you send it to an ad hoc approval and they signed off on it, then it gets to the implementation tab and they say, oops, sorry, reject it. I don't care if you send it to reject and they reopen it or you send it back to draft and it comes through. Those ad hocs have to be recreated. I don't have to recreate the approval levels of reviewer and business approval and so forth, but any ad hocs that have already seen it, they need to re-see it again. You're going to have to recreate those. You're going to have to reactivate that functionality. But so those are just some of the things you have to think about. Again, like I said, be aware of the tool, what the tool can and cannot do. Define the spreadsheet of your checklist. That's what this is saying. Get together. If you're going to use change management, get together and say, what are we looking for them to fill out before we take it to the cab? What are we looking for to fill out before it goes to schedule? You have to have a scheduled date and time. So before it advances to schedule, before you approve it as a change manager or whoever, you got to have a scheduled date. When are you going to do it? Okay. Do you have to have a risk level? Do they have to answer the risk level questions, or do they just go in and change the risk level to 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? I went to one company and every one of their risk was a risk level 5 because they were told risk level 1 is the high, is the critical, and risk level 5 is the low. And I could see their confusion because BMC was confused when they had developers, because it still says in some of the sections risk level 1 is the highest, which is their default. 1 is the low. And so when I looked at them, we did a search. They said, oh yeah, one is our high. We don't use 1. So then we did a search. They had 600 and some odd changes at a risk level 1. I said, you got a lot of critical tickets here. Oh yeah, I guess we better change your process. So they changed their process. So that's where you have to look at the tool in that capacity. So you look at your checklist and see if everything is in there that they do. This is one that you have to really understand is the fields of change type and class. Class is the stages, the steps that take place in, is it a normal, a standard, or whatever. I try to make it as simple as possible. A standard is pre-approved change. I don't have to go to the cab again. I could do it now if I submit it and run through the process. You may want to throw in the supervisor of the group as the approving authority at review, but it bypasses business, it bypasses implementation. We go straight to schedule and we can do the work because it's already been pre-approved. How can you tell if it's a pre-approved? Because I have a change template. You create a change template for all your standard changes. Any questions on that? Okay. Normal is something that has to be done after the cab has reviewed it, which is basically 7 days or more. Because if the cab meets every week, it's a normal change that is not seen by the cab until next week. So if you put it in on Wednesday and they meet Wednesday and they've already passed the meeting, then you don't get to do anything with it until the following week. So it's 8 days, 9 days, or whatever. Expedited is less than 7 days. So, or in other words, less than the cab. So it's something that's got to get done, but the cab doesn't have to meet before it, but they still need to sign off. That's where the notifications for cab comes in. The emergency is, of course, everybody knows it's got to be fixed now, but it still has to go through an approval process. So you usually have an emergency cab that's put together for that. And they usually see it at the request for authorization or the review, and then it bounces down to schedule. Okay. Latent is when those changes basically have modified. So a latent change is, hey, I made a mistake. This is a step we skipped. We added it in. I want to change it from, which you can't really do it if it's in the implementation stage anyway. But if you changed it from normal to latent, it automatically kick it to complete. And now you got to find out, why did you mark it as latent? I get a lot of latents because it's already happened before, just like no impact. I worked for the Caribbean cruise liner down in Miami, Florida, and they had an organization over in Europe. They did the changes in their system, but all they needed to do was record it in ours. So we did ours as a latent. So they come in, create it, mark it as latent, save it, boom, it automatically went to the completed stage. They just wanted to have a record because it was all done. So no approval is required on latent. Change type, the biggest ones I want you to look at is project, change, and asset maintenance. If you don't have a release program, don't worry about it. Project is if you don't have a release and you want to have a big project, hey, we're going to implement upgrade to remedy. We're going to go to 21.03.01 or .1. We don't have release. I'm going to call a change request as a project. And everything that's tied to it, getting the software, get it request, and everything else, I put changes that are attached to it. Asset maintenance, you can trigger a change template to automatically create a change ticket, but you need to help with asset maintenance. So you need to have a CI and asset management, schedule it. And then what it'll be, it'll look for that schedule as asset maintenance change template and create your change request. So if you have regular maintenance work that needs to be done on the standard, you can select that. So when you create your standard change templates, don't call it a change, call it an asset maintenance. But make sure you have a CI that's tied to it. Any questions on change template? I already talked about this one. Define your change teams. Change manager, you should have a group, just a single group that oversees. It depends on your size. You could have 3 or 4 based on region if you wanted to, that handles the changes. But you should have a change manager that's overseeing the organization's processes. Making sure, and when I say process, the change process. Do they fill in all the questions and answers and everything else before I take it to account? So when I worked at Unisys, we only had one person that was Unisys hired to do it. She was in Minnesota, and the customer was American Red Cross, and they're on the East Coast. Minnesota's what? Mountain time, right? 2 hours difference. For Central? Okay, yeah. So 1 hour difference. Okay. 1 hour difference. So when they came on to work, it's 7 o'clock, it's 6 o'clock her time. She didn't start work till 10. So all these changes that are coming in that she's supposed to respond to didn't get done until 10 o'clock. So don't keep it to one person. I'm not saying just keep it to one. I think you should have at least 3 or 4 change managers that are dealing with the overall change, making sure everything's done. But then change coordinators is each group has 2 or 3 change coordinators. Okay. And of course, you need to have a CAD, change advisory board, bring in the big wigs, security, application, database, servers, whatever else that you need to have a say so on it. Again, this to have that functionality. Opcats can drive the risk assessment questions. Would you ask the same question for software versus hardware implementation? Would the risk level be different for hardware versus software? If your answer is it's not different and the questions aren't different, you don't need opcats. But if there's a difference there, the risk level will change based on the answers that are given. So you can use opcats to drive the list of questions that you want to ask them. So you can give me a basic list of 5 questions, and then you can say, okay, for software, I want those same 5 questions and 4 more. For hardware, I want those same 5 questions and 2 questions more. And you can set, and you could do that to come up with the appropriate risk level assessment. Okay, any questions on that? Yes, Kim, you looking confused?
No, I'm thinking about our process and stuff that we were just making notes and stuff that we need to think about as you're discussing.
I mean, you have a set, it's kind of like you have global set of questions, which you can define for everybody. Then you can do company set of questions. Then you can do tier 1 questions, tier 2 questions, tier 3. But keep in mind, if you go down to tier 3, make sure you include the global questions. You have to recreate those globals to that, or it doesn't just magically pull those in. You have to recreate those. And so you have to plan it out. You have to look at those. We already talked about the business service process. Add those because that defines your podcasts and your ticket assignments for the coordinators and so forth. Define your implementation plan. When I was at Unisys, they gave a spreadsheet and it had the implementation plan, the backup plan, and the verification plan, and they had to fill it out. I'm like, why do you really need to do that if I go ahead and tell you in the document, here's what we're going to do in the activity log, I can flag it, and then my tasks are my steps that I'm doing. Why do I have to repeat it in this Excel spreadsheet that I'm never going to look at? So I try to convince Unisys to get rid of that, and they finally did at the end because it was redundant and people were getting pissed off because it was redundant work that they had to do. Okay, so what is your defined functionality? Put them in the activity, flag it as a, I think it's called an install plan or backup plan. They do have that verification plan. Find the right one. If not, then you can also add that as well. But you need to have that plan. Talked about the risk level questions. Always define those. It's based on the categories or whatever. Get that out there. Covering up my logo here. So.
You do more than hiding clothing.
Thank you. See, I need to learn more about Zoom. Okay, limit. This is, I already talked about this. limit the number of people that can actually create a change request. And again, it's confusing, as you already saw. So keep the confusion to the ones that are going to do it all the time, which is your coordinators and your managers. Minimize the number of change coordinators. Again, 3 people versus 15, less training, get the right answers and so forth. It's kind of hard to sell that to some organizations because they want everybody to do everything. Unfortunately, I've worked with one customer. We gave them all incident user and infrastructure user, and they said, oh no, they can change anybody's tickets. So we had to go back and get an infrastructure master and incident master. And I'm like, but you have no control over it. That's a bad thing to do. But they're like, oh no, we're used to it. They can do whatever tickets. We okay. We have it. Nobody screwed up anybody's tickets until you start hearing people complain. Why did my ticket get changed or taken away? What's that? No, they did not have good audit notes, because then I had to come in and add some auditing fields for them on that capacity. So again, talking about that, coordinator can do the coordinator, the task can be the others, or that didn't get coordinator rights and so forth. I told you about the info listings. These are the differences if you're using the back end or if you're going to use the functionality within Smart IT. You can look at the different settings, different options that are available. You do have a couple of those that are on the right-hand side that are also in Smart IT. Okay, but the only problem is you really can't lock it after the fact. So I still have to go and create the workflow. Whenever you set it to implementation, I close everything. You can no longer modify any open active activity or modify. Utilize tasks. Every change request should have at least one task. These are the standard tasks: implementation, verification, documentation. Oh, wait a minute, Lenny. What about backup? Well, when does a blackout occur? When you're implementing, right? So you can create a task to add on, but guess what? You just broke the rule of, well, wait a minute, we had it approved. Now you change the process. So what do you do if you back out? That's part of the verification task. If you have to back it out, go ahead and back it out and let us know. And then of course the change would then have to be bypassed. So when you have verification task and it fails and you have to back out, in the task, don't say closed successful, say closed failure. Somebody with me on that? What's going to happen to the documentation task? It's bypassed. What's going to happen to the change? It gets closed. It gets completed with issues. So then what they'd have to do is then redo another change because it failed. And they create a problem. So again, task, have at least one task. The task actually moves it from schedule to implementation in progress as well. And it can be your stopgap too. Task results in Smart IT. You can see all the tasks are staged. You can see they're all in the task group 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. When all the tasks are done, then the task 2 gets fired in that process. Okay, and you can change them if you want to. But again, you can't change these tasks into a 2, 3, 4, but you can change them around if you wanted to within the group. Okay. Utilize the email systems communication. Communicate back and forth if you have questions. If you don't know what, if you have questions about this ticket, how about sending it to the server guy to review it? They have the link when you send that email incident to them, so they can look at the change, view it, see it, and then they can put their own comments. Why do I need to do an ad hoc approval? Unless you actually want a signature that said yes or no. So use the email system. So you basically just click on email this change request. It pops up. With progressive web apps, this is where it has a checkbox that says limit to who's on the ticket. You'd have to uncheck it so you can send it to anybody within the company or outside the company, however you want to do it. Next session will be the approval process. Make sure you have an effective approval. I'm going to leave that alone until next session, but make sure you define the configuration paths. Make sure you define the mapping paths correctly. Who's supposed to approve what, when, where, and how. And who are the approving authorities? So this is what you'll get into the configuration process. I usually customize the configuration process by company. I don't change the global. I change the company. So I go in and create one record. It says, oh, you never existed, so it'll create the custom records for me. Then I modify those and then I can add on. And I also change the phase name so I can use that same review level 5, 6, 7 times because the phase name is the uniqueness. If I use that phase name on the second time and save it, sorry, error. I can use it for a different company, but not the same company. So always change the phase. And again, I'll talk about more on that. The approvals, make sure you understand the approval levels. You have inherent group. You also have individual and groups. You also have levels, 1 through 999 levels. So you can have 999 people if you wanted to. If you wanted 5 people to approve it, each individual having their own signature, you can put them all at level 1 until that last one approves it. Then it goes to the next level in that whole process. Now, what I like about it though is instead of saying global deployment approval, I would say, for example, Packaging Corporation of America, and it would show up there. And then under the advanced criteria, it would stamp it with normal, standard, expedited. That's a different process flow. So I can have a different flow for each of the classes if I wanted to, or even the different types, project, asset maintenance, things like that. So this is just showing you in the approval process what levels you can do. I'm not going to stick with that because you could look at that and see if it is a standard change approver at the review, but nobody else does it. The change manager gets it at the end as well as the asset manager if it was an asset change. They have to make sure the CMDB was updated if you have a CMDB. They have to have the CAB report it. So the change manager has to make sure it's in the report that a standard change was done. Once they report it, then they can go ahead and close it. It doesn't stop the individual, the coordinator from doing their work. They've already done it. It's just, it stops the ticket from closing in case something else has to be updated. That was another issue. People classified them as standard changes and it never got approved. And then all of a sudden all hell broke loose. So you need to have that fallback. Train everything, train, always train on it. If you don't train, people aren't going to know what it is. And when I say train the approving authorities how to approve the tickets, how to reject them. You can do email approval. The only thing about email approval that you can't do, you cannot require them to put in their password to verify that that is who they are. So if you wanted me to approve something, my wife could get it my phone and approve it for me. Okay, so that's a drawback on that aspect. But they can go to the approval center. Do I need to take a license? I do if I need to get into the change ticket. But if I don't need the change request, I go to the approval console. I can approve it from there or from the email. And then training aids, always provide training aids. They're going to need the documents in that aspect. And here's an example of a training aid that we did at the American Red Cross, gave them their standard for government issues. And we basically, I do that all the time, but with spreadsheets for training aids. I do a lot of scripts and so forth, and checklists and things like that. So that kind of gives you the best practice for change management and hopefully considering how to focus your attention on the tool, the business processes, the people to assign or associate or things like that. Anybody have any questions?
So we have I guess more of how our process works, how we translate into the terminology. We have every Tuesday, we have a cross-functional meeting. And that cross-functional meeting is our OIT, help desk, network operations, network security. We have a discussion from 8 to 9 every Tuesday.
Okay.
And discussion comes up if somebody wants to change like the landing page on the Chromebooks or what our browser is or standardize something. It gets discussed with all the parties there. And then whatever decision's made, the next morning it goes to the manager meeting, senior manager meeting with the CIO. So what I guess the cross-functional technically be the technical advisory board,
right?
Right, the review board,
right?
And then the CAB would be the senior managers team with the CIO.
That is correct.
That's what we use for our terminology.
That is correct.
We're thinking our process through. Okay.
That is correct. And then again, what you can look at is setting up the approvers as a group and put people into those groups, and they get them at level 1 for your, what do you call it? TRB, technical review board. you can put those into their own group and get signatures from each one of them. In that capacity, they are aware of it. They can put their 2 cents in. Now, it could be like Dell, but you never reject it. But the whole thing is you acknowledge receipt of it. You acknowledge that it's there. If you have any questions, then of course you would be able to reject it. And it goes back to draft to start the process again. The managers won't even know it until you've gone through that whole process. But the question would be, do you send it on to the supervisor before you meet up with them? Do you want to have a group discussion about that request in your meeting? You say you meet once a week, right?
So the cross-functional meets once a week.
So
And
would you
all
discuss?
the senior managers pretty much are in that same meeting.
Right.
Except for our CIO is not.
Okay,
So we have our dialogue, we discuss whether it's, what are the impacts, what's going on with the school calendar, all the stuff that's going on. And then if we say, okay, there's nothing that would prohibit this from going into play, it comes up at the senior manager meeting and say it was discussed, this is the positives, we found no negatives. You know, are we okay with turning this on? And we have that
Okay.
discussion and the CIO says, yes, I'm good with it, or no, this, you didn't know about this, or did you think about this kind of thing?
okay, so my recommendation based on the information that I have from you right now.